Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Ignited podcast. I'm your host, Doug Jones, CEO of Ignite Atlantic. And we love to feature the great companies and entrepreneurs of Atlantic Canada and the impact they're making. Today, we're honored to have a friend of mine, Josh Counsil, as our guest. And he is the founder or co-founder of Good Robot Brewing, and Josh is what he describes as a recovering engineer, which is an interesting term, turned entrepreneur. And part of that is he's really gotten into keynote speaking and helping other companies around the region. He co-founded Good Robot Brewing back in 15 with Angus Campbell and Doug Kehoe. And he describes himself as an entrepreneur who struggles with that title, I think it's fair to say. He's got an interesting family background, and we'll get into that a little bit. Really raised by, from what he's told me in the past, murder mystery dinner theater owners. And I'd like to learn more about that. But he's co-founded multiple award-winning business, and Good Robot, is a really good brand by itself, but they've emerged as one of Atlantic Canada's most innovative and beloved breweries, and kind of known for unconventional brewing experiences. And I think we'll get into some of that detail through our conversation. But welcome to the podcast, Josh. Really appreciate you coming and being part of it.
Thanks, Doug. I appreciate the invite. It's been a long time coming. I'm just a little technology disabled, if you will. So the first time
Yeah,
we tried to do this, I mucked it up on my end.
no, that's all right. And the funny part is, as a recovering engineer, you'd think you'd have more technology savvy, but it's
There's a reason I left the field.
yeah. Um, there's a bunch of parts I'd like to get into with you, but starting off, I really like a good origin story. So, maybe you can share the story of how Good Robot was kind of founded, because I know you're in another career path and with your co-founders. Maybe you can give us a little insight into how it was established.
Yeah, we are all three of us recovering engineers. We met at Queen's University on the engineering floor, which before university I thought would be the cool place to be. That's how you learn lessons.
Yeah.
I met Angus and Doug on that floor. Doug was actually one door over from me. Angus was a few doors down, and he was the one getting in trouble for playing his music at night. Angus's background, he's from Cape Breton. His entrepreneur roots start as a wedding DJ when he was a teenager. He borrowed some money and became a wedding DJ, got his own equipment, did very well with that. He and Doug studied chemical engineering, and they were trying to get a startup going of basically these roll-out photovoltaic cells. They're basically highly transportable, what do you call it, solar panels. And I studied engineering because I wanted to be an Imagineer. I wanted to work at Disney building rides, because that sounded really fun. And when I told my career counselor I wanted to be an Imagineer, she heard the word engineer and said, "You got to study math and science." And as it turns out, the mechanical functioning of the ride is really not all that interesting to me. I just like the part where you scream and get your photo taken.
Yeah.
So, but that sort of experiential piece, I think, is really bred into me. And in college, we just had this house of misfits that we lived at. We were housemates for 3 or 4 years. Queen's University was pretty cliquey. You had a lot of wealth there. You had a lot of, our next door neighbors were the lacrosse team. Across the street was the football team. Next door was the cheerleading squad. And we were all these bizarre, scrappy engineers and one biosci student who didn't quite fit the mold. So we kind of hung out with the guys who worked at the poutine shop and the bouncers from the nightclub. And, our parties that we threw were always this hodgepodge of non homogeneity, if you will, really mixed bag of stoners and party animals and football teams and everyone was welcome.
Right.
And I think that really translated into this community feel that we really liked. And when we went into our engineering careers, respectively, me in Seattle, Angus in the oil fields of Alberta, and Doug in Ministry of Environment in Ontario, I think we were lacking that sense of very multi-discipline, multicultural camaraderie and community building that we had in college, and was so fun. And so one day I got a call when I was in our New York office from Angus, And he said, I think Doug and I are considering building a brewery in Halifax. And I had never visited Halifax, but I quit my job that week. I don't even think he invited me formally out of the project, but I just sort of let myself in and quit my job after talking to my parents and flew to Calgary to live with Angus to write the business plan, and then on to Halifax in 2014, where we started fundraising and building. And from there, we started with one brew pub location. And the whole sort of ethos that we didn't have defined at the time was the sense of kind of camaraderie for misfits, or a very come as you are celebration of individualism.
Right. Yeah. And you've really emerged as that, for lack of a better term, that quirky kind of brand. And I know you've had a lot of different ways to position yourself in the marketplace, not just from the name Good Robot Brewing, which is a great name. But but tell us, because I know the journey for starting a brewery is fraught with peril. There's all kinds of
Yeah.
from a business
Uh,
case to get a brewery off the ground is super complex. You must have run into a lot of the barriers that were financial, holes in the ground,
yeah.
you know. So what types of things did you have to do to gain reputation in the marketplace? What kind of activities did you do to get people in the doors? Because that's often the hard part, is getting them to try or to experience what you're selling.
Yeah. I think it's funny you mentioned financial holes in the ground, because there literally was a hole in the ground. We did it. We were engineers, and we built our place by the book, and we got the permitting and everything. And they made us install this $25,000 manhole so that they could sample environment. Nova Scotia it could sample effluent leaving our building to make sure we weren't dumping any toxins down the drain. And we quickly learned that every other brewery, whether it was in our neighborhood or in the province, just didn't even bother applying for permit. They just built a place and
Did
opened
it.
it. And so I think we kind of learned the hard way of, this is the bootlegger province, right? This is,
Right.
do it and beg forgiveness.
Mm,
Because if you try to do it the right way, you'll jeopardize your financial future.
yeah.
Um, we actually changed our name 3 weeks before opening. We were called Wrought Iron Brewing, and Breakhouse, who was the agency that designed our tap room, just couldn't wrap their heads around us calling us that, because it was so stoic and a bit, hyper masculine, and it just was not a reflection of who we are, which was kind of goofballs.
Right.
So they suggested we go with Drunk Robot, which I loved, but was not legal technically in the alcohol space. So we went with Good Robot, and so we had to rebrand merchandise and everything on top of already opening a business in 3 weeks. We had to do that. I think we captured attention pretty early on because Nova Scotia is. I just did this in my keynote at Fox Harbor for Tourism Industry Association. Nova Scotia. Halifax has this campaign about being bold and innovative, and certainly those elements exist. But so much of what has made Nova Scotia successful is this scrappiness,
Right.
doing a lot with very little, and also being kind of weird. We're not known for being a really polished Hollywood A-list province. We're known for Maud Lewis, and we're known
Yep.
for Frankie the Weatherman, and all these things. So if you can mimic that, you could do pretty well. I think 2 years before we even opened our doors, I was creating blog content and social media content about the journey, and how the journey is so messy. Unlike our engineering careers, which were there's nice systems and everything. Everything that went wrong could,
Right.
from equipment showing up late to infringement to, all these things. And when you share those behind the scenes stories, by the time we got to opening day, we were so crazy hyped that there was just this organic pull.
Right.
So we grew pretty well that first summer
Mm.
with just a retail store and a brewery. The real challenge came when we opened our tap room, which it was supposed to open the fall. It opened December 17th, 2015, right before the Christmas season, right smack dab in the middle of the Christmas season when all the
Right.
plans are laid out already. And then going into January, the worst month of the year for hospitality and brewing. And that's when it was like, okay, we just spent however many hundreds of thousands of dollars building this place.
Right.
And now we're weeks away from bankruptcy. if we don't start putting some butts in seats.
Right.
So that's where we had no budget left, and you just had to use crazy ideas to capture attention. Things that the Trailer Park Boys would be proud of. And some of those things included. I mean, we were good at attracting attention. We did a silent reading event, which was a concept I borrowed
Yeah.
from Seattle. That cost $0 of marketing budget, and the concept was so novel of a bar in Halifax known for Kaylee's and kitchen parties doing an event where you shut up for 2 hours and drink beer. There's no music, there's no talking. That's hard for a Maritimer to do.
Yeah.
And it was so novel, it stood out. And with only, 3 days notice and a Facebook post, we filled the place.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that because that was brought up to me this week. Somebody, from our Sydney location was talking about. I said, "What'd you do on the weekend?" He said, "I went to a silent reading thing at a cidery." And I'm thinking, I know where that came from. So that's unique, and I'm sure you attracted a different clientele at something like that compared to the typical party crowd.
Yeah, absolutely. It was
Yeah.
a crowd of introverts like pubs and they like people and they like drinking.
Yeah.
They just don't necessarily want a small talk. So when
Right.
you force them into a room together and they read for 2 hours, suddenly they're itching to talk. And what they notice is they're looking around, they're going, "Oh, that guy's reading Jack Kerouac. I love Jack Kerouac," or "I don't like Jack Kerouac." And now I have a reason to talk. So about half or two-thirds of the people would actually stay after silent reading and keep chatting. And they now had a connective tissue that made introversion no longer a barrier to conversation. So it was always a fascinating social experiment.
Yeah, I love the aspect of community and making people feel a part of something bigger.
Yeah.
So so and I think for a lot of introverts out there, those social situations can be fairly awkward, but this is a new approach to, building that community. And the cool part is it's built around your brand, and it did help to establish you as a unique offering in the ecosystems.
Mhm.
There's another thing I'd love to hear more about is Condom Gate. Your whole
Thanks.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, Rubber Gate,
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it. But
Yeah.
maybe you can
Yeah.
share that story a little bit.
Yeah. I think that was 1 month later. If you actually look at I don't know if you can access it publicly, but if anyone's curious who's listening, I can send you a picture. If you look at our Google search traffic over time, between January and October 2016, which would have been, you know, 6 months into retail and brewing and 1 month into our tap room opening, we had about three big PR incidents, four actually, that attracted a lot of organic reach and really helped build a base and drove a lot of website and in-person traffic. Silent reading was one of them. The next one was Rubbergate. And what had happened was, Halifax has lots of pubs. So we wanted to create something that was atypical, that was a zig where other people were zagging. And Valentine's Day is typically catered towards couples. And we were living in an alternative with a lot of people, or we were living in a neighborhood with people with alternative lifestyles.
Right.
And a lot of them unmarried, and a lot of long-term couples, but no families. So we created a Valentine's Day event. I think it was called Blue Valentine, after the Tom Waits song. That was kind of funny and irreverent and sexy and raunchy. And it had burlesque. There was a guy smoking a cigarette and a woman who had balloons. She was covered in balloons, but naked underneath, and he would pop the balloons. Um, customers would get up on the microphone and tell embarrassing sex stories. I couldn't believe what they would tell a crowd of people in the pub. But one of the things we wanted to do for it that we thought was a fun, kind of irreverent, saucy idea was to get some branded condoms with our mascot, Roby the robot. And we got them made in the States and they got seized at the border by Canadian Border Services because they're considered a medical device, which you're not allowed to brand in Canada.
Right.
So they took them, they sent me this hilarious letter. I've never gotten such a serious letter about something so ridiculous. And I took a picture of it, put it on Facebook, called it, Good Robot Promotional Fail number 437. And immediately, I mean, it was within 5 minutes, I was getting calls from the media. I didn't expect that. I thought people would just have a laugh. I didn't expect that to go as far as it did. It ended up in the US and the UK and on BuzzFeed. I still think we're the only brewery to be featured on BuzzFeed, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
At one point, and maybe still the content website of the internet.
Yeah.
And our fans, one of our fans just wrote hashtag Rubbergate in the Twitter section or the Facebook section or something. And we couldn't stop laughing at that. Suddenly you had eyes on us again. You had people coming in for this event. And it really solidified our brand as, we're not one of these companies that takes beer very seriously, which was sort of what the market was.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I it's the interesting part to me is those types of things can be taken in such a negative light by a lot of companies, but
Yeah.
uh, what I noticed with your team was you leaned into those things and you
Yeah.
really celebrated the fact that you were making you were making mistakes, the authenticity of what you were doing. And I think you alluded to that when you were talking about the social media, like, and prior to us starting the recording of this, we were talking about, the ugly parts of business. A lot of people don't disclose the problems that are happening behind the scenes. We want to have such a polished image out there. Whereas Good Robot kind of celebrated the fact that, we're doing things a little differently and we're making mistakes and we're doing this. But I think it ended up, for lack of a better term, ended up being an attractant to
Yes.
you. I
Big
think,
time.
people celebrate the fact that, they're like us, which
Yeah.
is kind of a cool storyline. So do you
Yeah.
find, as your business grew and you've certainly had a lot of growth over the last few years, are you are you taking yourselves more seriously, or has it changed that mindset?
Yeah, I don't know if the framing is taking ourselves more seriously, but certainly, when COVID hit and it forcibly shut down our hospitality operation, we leaned into e-commerce and we started taking wholesale more seriously.
Right.
And suddenly our retail, we bought a canning machine with 60K because capital was cheap at the time. Interest rates were zero. They were paying you to take money. And overnight our retail tripled. I'm talking within like a week. So we realized, I think the analogy we used was this brand is a gorilla in a cage and we're holding it back.
Mhm.
Let's see what happens if we let it out. So we decided to expand and we had run out of capacity the previous 3 years. Every summer we ran out of production capacity. So we were outsourcing some of our capacity. And we thought, there's got to be a higher premium way of doing this. Co-packing, beverage co-packing is very popular in Ontario and Western Canada. In the States, it's the norm, but it didn't really exist in Atlantic Canada to the degree it does there. Actually, alcohol co-packing was illegal until 2021. So they changed that legislation that summer. So we borrowed about $6.5 million in mixed private equity and public charter banks and crown corps to create the beverage factory,
Mhm.
which is a world-class beverage production facility, and we can make everything from energy drinks to non-alcoholic wine. The culture at that factory, the people there that are attracted to production and packaging and precision and efficiency are very different than hospitality.
Yeah, I would guess.
Hospitality wants to have fun with their friends. They want to indulge. They want to party. That factory wants to be done at 3 p.m. and they want the product to be perfect every time and they don't want anything that's going to throw a wrench in the works
Right.
and they're thinking about their financial futures. It's two very different people,
Yeah.
right? And so you've got this beverage factory and then Good Robot the brand. So at the beverage factory, we're not doing stories about condoms and wrought
Yeah.
iron brewing and whatever. The beverage factory is more like wrought iron brewing. I'm saying it
Right.
out loud,
Yeah.
right? And Good Robot, the brand, with its sales wholesale team and its marketing team and its hospitality units and its exports, that's more similar to the original company. So now we've got two companies operating under one, incorporated as
Yeah.
one. with extremely different cultures at the team
Mm,
level. So
right.
I think there is a level of seriousness at the beverage factory because
You have to
if
be. Yeah.
you have to be,
Yeah.
if your product
Yeah.
is a little bit off, it's okay if at a bar you have 400 customers one day and one person has a not great experience. It's not the end of the world. If one product has one little minor thing, there are 100,000 consumers drinking that product.
Right. 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 Yeah, and it can be difficult to run a company with two distinct cultures inside of it. So your approach as a leader in that company has to be so different. And knowing you, I mean, I'm assuming you're more on the good robot side of the way you kind of operate because I know how creative you are. So it can be a challenge for a leader to manage those two distinct cultures, I guess.
Yeah. It's funny, I wear both, right? Like
Yeah.
all three founders really wear both. Angus especially.
Yeah.
Doug is a little more focused on the factory. I am the technical sales arm along with Angus of the co-packing service.
Right.
So I'm selling to cideries, energy drink brands, companies internationally, the largest, some of the largest companies in the world I have phone calls with,
Yeah.
the largest brands from different countries. And you're wearing that hat that says, I'm the condom guy, but also take this very seriously because we do know what we're doing. It's sort of like the very high performing. I'm not a high performing business person by any means, but the very high performing business person or athlete, let's say, who finishes their day and they really want to have a pina colada.
Right.
You know,
Right.
it's like I like having a good time, but I take that side of it very very seriously.
Yeah, you know, I I kind of identify with that too because I think having fun in what you do is very important. I think it leads to longevity in the industry too, and I don't think you can take your life so seriously that you're not having fun along the way. So I
Hmm.
think you're kind of balancing those things, but it's often tough as a company scales because there's so many different pressures on an organization, the leadership, the teams to help drive that. And I think there's an expectation sometimes that you are now grown up, if that makes sense. And
Yeah,
I think you said you don't consider yourself that super experienced business leader, but I don't think many of us do, quite honestly. Everybody's got imposter syndrome of some type.
sure.
But as you grow and learn, I think you emerge into becoming the leader that you're supposed to be. I don't think you have to follow other people's rule books for this,
Yeah,
but
yeah. That's a good
looking
point.
at the co-packing aspect, because what's interesting to me about the co-packing industry in general is you're essentially helping lift up the entire industry. You're giving opportunity to have the manufacturing process done here in Atlantic, Canada, supporting potentially your competitors and others. But, that collective is a interesting approach. It's not an approach that a lot of people there's such a competitive nature sometimes in business,
Mhm.
but you've created an opportunity to help your competitors actually produce product and get to market. Was there a thought process for you when you got into the co-packing, or did you just see a void in the marketplace, or you were tired of sending your product elsewhere for
Yeah.
packaging?
This was really, the beverage factory is really Angus's vision and Angus and Doug doing a lot of the heavy lifting. I'm not, as we witnessed by me starting this podcast 10 minutes late, I'm not a great technical guy. You
Right.
don't want me, you don't want me working behind the bar and you don't want me operating the factory equipment.
Right.
Something gets lost between head and hand with me.
Right.
So, but I am good with people and especially strangers. So
Right.
I was on the fundraising side of that project and
Right.
helping to develop certain systems, especially on the sales side.
Yeah.
And refresh my memory, Doug. I took a bit of a garden path there. What was the question again?
Well, I'm just interested in the fact that you're helping your competitors
Right.
by
Right.
selling them access to this. So I think back to your point, you're the consumer facing part of this. So
Yeah,
you're actually interfacing with your competitors.
big time.
What I'm
Big time.
interested in is like, if you had to kind of summarize this, like, what's important to you in helping your competitors succeed in
Yeah.
the marketplace? What impact do you think that's going to have in our economy, but also in the beverage industry?
The commonality is that everything needs to be manufactured at the end of the day.
Right.
If, let's say, over the next 70 years, beer has been decreasing as a category for well over 30 years, on
Yeah.
average about 1% per year. We're not going to hang our hat on beer, even though I personally love it.
Right.
One thing that we learned very early, and that I still see a lot of owner operators in Nova Scotia struggle with, is that you're not your consumer. So for me, I never feel the conflict. I understand it rationally of we are producing a product for, let's say, a non-alcoholic brand, which would be considered an indirect competitor of our alcoholic beer brand that we produce.
Right.
Or we're producing, even more directly, another brewery's beer who shares the same shelf space at the liquor corporation that we do,
Right.
right? That brewery might also have a bar in our neighborhood.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
there's really three arms of the company. You've got the beverage co-packing, you've got the wholesale and restaurant sales of our kegs and cans of Good Robot beer, and then you've got the hospitality, which we have three venues, two
Mm.
in Halifax and one in Elmsdale. And there are what might a lot of people might perceive conflicts of interest everywhere you look.
Yeah.
Just putting another product on at our bar, for example, let's say a keg of non-alcoholic wine, just for simplicity.
Yeah.
The selection of that ends up causing some ruffles within our own company.
Right.
The sales team wants to put stuff on at our bar where they can do an exchange where we sell our beer at that person's bar and they sell their product at our bar.
Mhm.
The co-pack team wants to tap our co-pack products at our bar. The
Right.
hospitality team wants to put stuff on that's exciting to their guests. So you're always sort of doing this dance of trying to get everyone to swim together. But really, Atlantic Canada is so small and it is so hard to do business here uh, that you do kind of have to be more collaborative.
Yeah.
You have to be less cutthroat. What works in Ontario doesn't always translate here.
No, and I think it's part of our culture to collaborate in Atlantic Canada, and I think we could benefit from more of that because it's very difficult, as you said, to. And the beverage industry is one of those industries that's very difficult for one company to do it. We've had
Hmm.
examples with, Keith's and with Olin's and with Moosehead and all these brands. Um, but there's been a lot of people like the microbrew experience is really interesting to me because over the last decade, especially, you tend to see these microbrew places popping up in all these smaller communities around the province.
Yeah.
But the challenge becomes sustainability. Like how do you grow that brand? And certainly you guys started with a small footprint at the beginning, but you've expanded. But we've also seen some of those other companies not succeed
Yeah.
over the last number of years. It's been a difficult, and I think it's fair to say across the whole industry, I think you've seen, I don't know if it's a right sizing. What's your kind of opinion on what's transpired over, because COVID certainly played a part, as you
Hmm.
said, but it also created opportunities. So
Always, yeah.
yeah, so do you see that trend with the community microbreweries being stood up?
Yeah.
Do you see that continuing, or what are you seeing on the ground across Nova Scotia, especially?
We were number 14 to open in the province. At its peak, there were more than 70
Yeah,
breweries that opened. In the last 2 years, top of mind, I could name about 10 that have gone under,
yeah,
and several that were strong in the wholesale department.
Right.
The right sizing is we're obviously feeling it as an industry. It happens with every industry, right?
Yep.
You're seeing we've been right sizing for probably about a decade now and just been really feeling it the last few years. It was way too much capital given out to way too many different people with plans.
Right.
And then somebody at Toronto Dominion says, we got to reduce the risk on our microbrewing portfolio. So, Johnny, why don't of those 10 loans you gave out in Atlantic, Canada, why don't you pull four of them? You
Wow.
know,
Yeah.
and these, they can't service the debt, so they go under.
Yeah.
Um, it's it always hurts as a consumer and somebody who knows a lot of these people personally, but it's also a
Yep.
reality that every overvalued category happens, and the way it gets overvalued is hype. We're
Hmm.
all gorillas at the end of the day. Investors invest emotionally. They pretend to be rational,
Yeah.
but when something is exploding and you're seeing it in the media, craft beer, craft beer, oh, there's one in my neighborhood, and even my barbershop sells them. I got to
Right.
get in on this. They get
Yeah.
in on it. It becomes overvalued. Suddenly, there's news about one of the public offerings, and it's way undervalued from what they predicted.
Yeah.
Investors get skittish. They pull their money.
Mm.
Banks get skittish. They call the loans, and you see a bunch of them drop off. The other thing I see is not necessarily on the lending side, but also the sales side. Nova Scotia and I think Atlantic Canada is traditionally a production place.
Hmm.
We're really good at forestry. We're really good at fishing.
Yeah.
But what do we do with all that stuff? Well, we send it to Asia and we send it to the US and we send it to Western Canada, right?
Right.
Beer is sort of the same. I see the same thing happening with the owner operators. Like, I don't like that sales and marketing stuff.
Mm.
You know, they tell the
Yeah.
field of dream story. If you build it, they'll come, and they don't.
Right. Right.
And marketing and selling, I find in Atlantic Canada below average compared to more competitive markets. So they produce a really good product, but they don't know about positioning. They don't know about consumer packaged goods labeling. They don't know about pricing, promotions, product placement, and
Hmm.
measuring consumer insights and advertising.
Yeah.
They just pay, a 21-year-old $20 an hour out of college to run their social media account, if
Right.
that.
Right.
And in the absence of marketing and sales, if you're not growing, you're losing. And I've
Yeah.
seen some brands with some great products and who had the wholesale listings not sort of keep that standing. And slowly they lost one, then the other, then the other. And then we come in along with other brands and the domestic and import brands. And we're pushing like crazy. Where we did
Hmm.
360 samplings last year. That's a sampling every day. That's six times what the
Right.
biggest domestic brands do. So you
Yeah.
really got to hustle to grow and to stay afloat. And I see a lack of that on the sales and marketing side in Atlantic Canada, and especially brewing.
Yeah. And you've recently expanded into other markets too outside of Atlantic Canada and launching new products there. Are you seeing the opportunity? And I wouldn't want to use the term saturation in our market, but you continue to look for other potential markets, right? As far as I think you're an LCBO in Ontario at this point, and
We were
or
for one summer. We were the only in 2023, the only Nova Scotia brand on shelf in the beer category, which is cool.
right, yeah,
But you don't really make a ton of money out of market. And craft is a weird category because its definition basically means small.
right,
It's like a
right,
category,
yeah,
that basically means local. And so when you move out, we've seen this in the States a lot. A really successful brewery in Oregon goes over, one state east into Idaho or Utah, let's say, and they lose there and they lose back home because they're now too big from their original market.
right,
And this new market doesn't know who they are. We've seen this over and over and over. So Atlantic Canada, I feel, is one market, and we're growing really well here. We've been growing about 50% year over year on our wholesale
wow,
side. Our sales team's very hungry, and they fight like hell.
yeah,
So we're doing this is always going to be the meat and potatoes right here. Um,
yep,
the export is more like it's again it's that irrational piece almost. It's just
right,
it's fun and it's sexy and there's a bit of a strategy behind it, but it's Nova Scotia will always be sort of the heart of the opportunity.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think that's a good point about the word craft because I've seen that. I've done a lot of work in Kentucky, the home of Kentucky bourbon, and you see a lot of small, not so many microbreweries, but you see a lot of small batch distilleries through Kentucky, and they really limit their supply, but they have to price accordingly too, so that they have consistent revenue. But there's some uniqueness about that. One of the ones that you kind of introduced to me was your new Diablo beer, and it was interesting because I think when you told me about the beer, you started by saying, it's a Mexican inspired, jalapeno, all that stuff. And so you get all these senses going in your head about what this is going to be. There's some danger involved because there's, something that's hot inside of that. But we tried it and I really enjoyed it. I've actually seen it on a number of taps in Halifax recently, and I've sampled it a few times because I don't want to judge on one sampling. I like to have at least 50 to 60 samples. So I'm sure it's good. But yeah, but with products like that, I think you're introducing new products similar to Diablo and other products. Do you see that as the future to keep innovating, keep bringing new recipes, new product to market, or is there a kind of ceiling to how many products you want to introduce?
Yeah, it's the focus is a really good thing in business. We already have a business that's so, I mean, looking around, if you look in the room here, this video, right, this is a chaotic room.
Right.
And it's somewhat emblematic of our business as well, balancing hospitality, consumer packaged goods, and manufacturing services. That's a lot of different arms. Within the craft beer side of it, there has to be what they call for the listeners at home a SKU rationalization, where you make, let's say, 40 products and you cut the bottom 30 or 20 that are only contributing 20% of the revenue, and you focus the time, attention, and resources on the top to really grow those. The challenge with craft beer and really any alcoholic product in Canada where it's a heavily controlled, regulated substance is it's not really up to the consumer and it's not really up to us either, right? We had 2 years ago our two top selling products in house of the year were not listed at the liquor corporations because they didn't feel that's where the market was going. They instead wanted a multi-pack light lager, which we had never really produced, was not our forte, was not known what we were known for.
Mm,
But we've been producing two now, our Good Robot Lager and our Good Robot Ultra, which is our Michelob Ultra equivalent, 100
right.
calories and 4% and 3 grams of carbs. And they're now our number two and three products because the liquor corporation is the one who says, you know, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. We're going to tell the consumers what
What
they
to
want
drink?
based on what we see
Yeah.
happening elsewhere,
Yeah.
what we see in New England and Ontario.
Yeah.
So innovation within craft beer can be really tough for that reason, but we can make anything. We can make
Right.
energy drinks, cocktails, non-alcoholic ciders. So there's room elsewhere outside of alcoholic beverages for us to innovate and do something more in the vein of Liquid Death, the water brand from the States, for example.
Right. Right. So that's interesting that, because certainly I've seen that going into the liquor stores in Nova Scotia and seeing, one or two products from Good Robot on the shelves or whatever it may be, but knowing that there's more out there. So where do people get those? Is it designed for the experience, like going into the tap rooms or your,
Sometimes, yeah.
yeah. Do you have like e-commerce ordering and things like this? What's the trend
Yeah.
happening for how do consumers get your product if it's not on the liquor store shelves? Because a lot of people may not realize how to do it.
I had I'm really good. I'm not good at day-to-day operations, but I'm good at either starting something or finishing it.
Right.
I'm known in college as the guy who ran through walls, quite literally.
Right.
And I shut down our e-commerce division. It was underperforming. Obviously, it was almost $1 million brand or arm of the company during COVID. By the time we shut down, it was about a $250,000 arm of the company each year, and we were doing an average order to somebody's house was about $75,
Hmm.
which is pretty big. It's a lot of beer, and it was still we were losing about $20 an order.
Wow.
So we had to outsource that. We outsourced it to Harvest Wines and Miko, and now
Okay.
they're doing our order fulfillment.
Okay.
So you can get it there. It's a relatively small segment that likes that experience.
Yeah.
Um, the wholesale, the private stores who sort of have grandfathered in licenses, so Harvest Wines and their
Yeah.
three locations are great. And then, yeah, our three stores are where you can get, and our bars are where you can get the most variety. The interesting thing is we started in 2015 with a tap room, and the tap room crowd always wants what's new and exciting and sexy.
Yeah.
Okay, I had this 2 weeks ago. What do you have that's new?
Right.
The wholesale crowd likes what's predictable and tastes
Hmm.
the same as it did a month ago and always available. So you have to balance those two. We haven't really made a good robot beer that is new in quite some time, and we probably won't for the next year or so,
Hmm.
unless wholesale requests it, because we're so busy producing other people's products at the factory.
Right.
The
Right.
good
Yeah.
news is that like the market still hasn't recovered from COVID in terms of consumer taste. So in
Hmm.
Halifax, there's not many bars where you can get a really good selection of the 60 plus breweries from around the province. You kind of
Hmm.
see the same five or six brands everywhere you go, which means that we've got our 6 or 8 core products that Good Robot makes at the bar. And then we're filling the rest of the taps with the other breweries who are still making fun, exciting new things every week.
Right.
So again, it becomes that opportunity of collaboration and kind of helping to grow the category a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And still creating the unique experiences in your beer garden and your tap room, and so I'm sure we're gonna go have a brew at one of these locations in the, in the next little bit. So, um,
Yeah.
just a couple of last things, because I know you're busy making beer and all that good stuff, or running around selling beer. But what's your favorite Good Robot beer yourself? What's your
So
recommendation?
there is very little consistent about me, including my taste. Currently, for the last maybe 6 months or so, it's sort of a three-way tie. I love the Diablo right now because it's like a lager plus.
Mm,
A little bit of lime, a little bit of jalapeno. It's not huge, but it's nice if you want a little bit more than just a light, refreshing lager. And my buddy, who's a director of operations at a hotel, he called it the best hangover breakfast, the best hangover drink he's ever had.
right.
So that's another
Yeah.
interesting positioning opportunity, maybe. I love our Ultra when I
Yeah.
want, a quickie and it's hot or it's been a long day at the factory and I just want it. There's something fun about that slim can it comes into. It just feels like a different experience when you're crushing them in the parking lot with the packaging team and
Right.
having a cigarette after work or whatever.
Yeah.
Uh, and then I'd say the third would be our double IPA. And there's
Mm,
a great story behind it. Um, while the low and no alcohol categories were skyrocketing for the last few years in terms of media perception, and that's how again people invest and they assume, oh, you must be doing so well with your non-alcoholic beer because I see the news everywhere. Everyone wants non-alcohol. It's
mm,
still a really tiny segment, no and
right.
low alcohol. So we had this guy Harish who was working with us, and he comes from a consumer packaged goods marketing background at Reckitt, a
Mm,
multi-billion-dollar
yeah.
firm in the States. And he just stood in a store at NSLC and he talked to customers. He said, "Why are you buying that IPA instead of that IPA?" And they were all saying, "Well, they're the same price, but that one's got more booze in it." Now, you don't necessarily think, the craft beer consumer, oh, they don't care so much about the ABV. You got all these fancy styles coming out. No, they care very much. And so
Mm,
he had this idea to pivot our Tropical Storm IPA series, which was four different beers made with four different hops.
mhm.
He pivoted it into a Tropical Storm category similar to a hurricane,
Yeah.
and and depending on the strength of the ABV, that was the strength of the category. So I forgot this hand gesture. It zooms my camera in and out. so
That's okay.
so
You feel very
so
strongly
I
about
just
this.
got yeah, I'm very anyway. Just got a crazy zoom up on me. Uh, so he created this tropical storm category 4, which was 4%, 5, which was 5%, 6, and all the way up to 7. And the most important attribute was the ABV, which was front and center right on the front of the can.
Right. Huh.
And that was the first thing you see on shelf. 4, 5, 6, and it tells you the ABV. Those products became our number one selling product in house via e-commerce and retail that year. And we had a lot of like his and hers couples. She liked the 4, he liked the 7.
Right.
So all this, it was interesting. The 7, and by the way, in terms of sales, in order, 7, 6, 5, 4, when they're
Yeah.
sold individually. So this double IPA is now the category 8. It's the 8%, which means more malt, more hops, more flavor, more booze. And it's just a
Right.
big, fun, super
Yeah.
approachable tropical experience.
It's kind of that mentality of more is better, right? If it's
Yeah.
got a bigger
Yeah.
number on it, that's the one I want.
Big
And
number.
because often, an 8% beer doesn't end well with me.
No.
It's probably not the best choice, but I think that's the one I want because it got more in it. So
Yeah.
it's interesting, but yeah. So I'm anxious to try the ultra. That's what I'll sample with you there next week.
Mhm.
But the different. I'm kind of like you. I kind of go between. I like sampling new things. So whether it's a new beer or a beer I haven't tried before, and moving around, I guess my palate kind of adjusts to wherever I take it. But it's good that you have a variety like that and different types of offerings. So, um,
Mhm.
I always like at the end of podcast is just getting I know that now you're sharing your experience doing various speaking engagements. Of course, we've had you in at Ignite and introducing you to some of our startups for advice, and you've been very generous
So
with
fun.
your time. But I'd like to get a piece of advice from you for the entrepreneurs out there and the startups that are building something in smaller communities, and which tends to be where we focus, of course, but a piece of advice to get through some of those pain points. You talked about that near bankruptcy experience and moving through that. What's one piece of advice that you would give an entrepreneur to help them with, let's look at mindset. How do you develop a mindset to get through some of those challenging times in business?
Yeah, I struggle with that myself, and it's going to be the theme of my upcoming chat with my psychologist. One thing I learned in the last few years from a psychologist was about ACT theory, and I can't remember top of mind what it stands for, but in Cole's notes, essentially, it's act on your values, not on your feelings.
Right.
And I have a brain that is very challenging. It confuses a lot of things. Thoughts get wound up in emotions, and we're currently dealing with a pretty challenging time in the company. Lots of growth. Everything's reopening for the summer. So what I have is basically this spreadsheet of different columns of things that matter to me, from family to friends to financial to travel to my partner Haley to so on and so forth. And every quarter, sort of like strategy, I just fill the columns that matter with one thing that enables that cup to be filled so that I don't get swept up into it.
Right.
And also warnings to myself about when I've acted on feelings instead of values. So
Hmm.
that's one way is just to look at what matters to you and to move forward, even if it feels bad at the moment.
Right.
The other piece I'll say is this is from my psychologist, Dr. Conrad. During challenging times, there's these three prerequisites that he recommended are useful to get through those times, and they pertain to your relationships in work, they pertain to your romantic relationship, to your friends. But every successful relationship is contingent upon these three things. One of them is competence, only one of them. So you mentioned imposter syndrome. A lot of people, especially Western society, we tend to feel technical competence is required for us to do the job. And often we have to do things, most of the time I find with entrepreneurship, we have to do things that we're not technically competent
Right.
in. Trial by fire all the time. So that one is often a 0 out of 1 for whatever we're going through. But the
Right.
good news is it's only one of three. The other two are autonomy and relatedness. And autonomy would be, do you feel a sense of ability to communicate your needs and or act upon your wishes, which is really important. The other one is relatedness. And that's, do you feel mutual compassion for the people that you are with, whether it's your romantic partner or your friends or whatever? And is it a two-way street?
Right.
Even with just those two assets, relatedness and autonomy, you can do some pretty remarkable things. You could be a completely technically incompetent leader
Right.
in a category. And we've seen this certainly in the business sphere and the political sphere, right? But
Yeah.
they might have a
Yeah.
great, right? They might have a great team and a lot of self-confidence and an ability to make stuff happen. So if
Mhm.
you can hang your hat on those two, that has certainly helped me through some hard times.
Yeah. And I think too, just to piggyback a little bit on that is I think what I've seen in your journey is the ability to take action and not not stop moving your feet and turn a negative into a positive, similar to what you did with Rubbergate and others, where other people would turtle, kind of go back into their shell. You kind of leaned into it, and I think that's a powerful lesson for entrepreneurs as well, is that how do you stay on the positive side of things even in tough spots. So it's yeah. So listen, Josh, I know you're a busy guy, so I yeah, really appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing some of your story, but some of your insights, and I would encourage anybody to go to your facilities, check out the I'm looking forward to the beer garden by the Commons this summer and checking that out. But there's some products from Good Robot around the Maritimes, of course, and certainly if you get a chance to listen to Josh speak, a variety of things, and I know you're on quite a few other podcasts that have been really well done. So hopefully the listeners will chime in and share their insights. So again, thanks very much, Josh. Look forward to connecting with you soon, and
Thank you.
thanks for everything.
Thank you, Doug. I'll see everybody at the pub.
Sounds good.